Hello RPG fans and welcome back to the kingdom. For my 16th challenge run, it will be Dragonquest XI Echoes of an Elusive Age Definitive Edition. I've never played a Dragon Quest game before, so I wasn't exactly sure what kind of experience I would be having. And I must say, this game was way longer than what I was expecting. I was not prepared for how many hours I put into this game. Trying to condense 50 hours of footage into however long this video is going to be was definitely quite the challenge. With never playing this game before, I wasn't quite sure what kind of limitations I would be able to put on myself, but I do know that the party members are AI controlled or have the ability to be AI controlled, so that is where I decided to take this challenge run. Can you beat Dragon Quest XI using only party members' damage? And by doing this kind of challenge, it does make the combat more difficult because the AI party members don't like to use buffs, but they will heal a critical ally if they are able to heal. And multiple targets are not good for AI combat. They don't tend to focus on one target. Instead, they kind of split the damage up, so that's also pretty bad. And if there's no one to heal for the healers, they tend to auto attack instead of using magic when they are set to the focus on healing tactics. So that, again, makes combat a little bit more difficult. And now on to the rules, which is no using shops, no over-leveling, no side quests, party members' tactics for damage must be show no mercy, solo battles and force interactions don't break the rules, no glitches, exploits, hacks, mods, free or paid DLC, and our victory condition is to beat the final storyline boss. With the sheer length of this game, I will be skipping over most of the storyline and mostly covering the mini bosses and bosses to help prevent spoilers. And if I were to cover the storyline, I feel like this would probably be like a 2.5 hour video challenge run, which doesn't really interest me, and I know for a fact it's not going to interest you guys. So I did start the game with the draconian quest of no shopping. However, you can still sell to the shops, which I thought was a little bit weird. And once I arrived at downtown Heliodor, there was a particular quest where I had to buy a holy water from a shop, which you can't do with this draconian quest underway. So little did I know that by removing it, you can't add it back on once you do that. So also looking back in hindsight, I probably should have looked up if there was another place that I can gather the holy water or if a mob dropped it. I didn't want to look anything up to help prevent spoilers, so this is actually where this quest drops off. However, throughout the entire playthrough, that was the only item that I bought was the holy water. I didn't use the sell to shops either, since you can't use shops. The money was kind of pointless, so even then, I didn't really see any value in it. The first mini boss fight and or boss of the game, the Tricky Devil. He has a AoE that can target both party members, and it doesn't really matter where everyone is on the field. If an AoE targets one person, it'll probably target everyone, which was a little bit weird. I don't know if the Dragon Quest games were normally like this, but that was definitely a new mechanic for me. But for the battle itself, he does hit a little bit hard, and I spend a lot of time defending on the main character who I decided to name Azure. And whenever someone gets low on health, I don't know if I learned heal at this point, but I was using items, the medicinal herbs, to heal for 31 HP on anyone that got low, and Eric does eventually take the Tricky Devil down, but I almost did run completely out of healing items. This was actually a pretty close fight. After following some story events, we now have Serena and Veronica as guest party members, if you will, and our next, I would consider this a mini boss fight, which would be Jarvis. He is accompanied by 3 shadow ads, which aren't really a big deal. Eric is able to make quick work of them, but that doesn't change the fact that that's still 4 targets that are attacking us. Now, with the guest party members, they do not have the ability to die, so it's actually pretty beneficial when the enemies attack them instead of Azure or Eric. When Jarvis inhales, his next turn, he's going to launch a really wide AoE attack that at this point in the game does a significant portion of our health bar, maybe about 70% or so, and it can hurt a lot. Now at this point, Azure does learn heal, so the healing output from us is definitely ramped up, and the guest NPCs as well can also heal us. They can also afflict sleep on us, which Again, isn't really that big of a deal because I believe the guest NPCs are able to cure that, but keeping up the pressure and keeping up the damage, this fight wasn't really anything special, and Jarvis does eventually go down. Some more storyline progression, and Veronica and Serena officially join the party. And this is great because little did I know at this point in the game how much of an absolute powerhouse Serena would be. I definitely undervalued her, but Veronica's damage output I really liked from a magical perspective. So I've got Eric for physical and Veronica for magical, which was pretty awesome, I thought. And this takes us to our next destination, the desert, where the Slayer of the Sands is our next opponent. And at this point, we do have Sylvando as a guest party member, and I highly undervalued this character pretty much until the very end of the game. I didn't realize how much of an absolute powerhouse he was. If I were to replay this game again, I would have him in the party immediately and permanently. He is such a awesome character. With the Slayer of the Sands, he does have the ability to confuse our party members, which Sylvando can also cure, so that's pretty awesome. He also casts Blind randomly, which of course, as you know from other RPGs, can make you miss your physical attacks quite a bit. But the enemy decides to use it on Veronica, which I thought was a little bit weird. It's not like our magic users going to be doing melee attacks, so that still works out for me during this fight. The enemy can also reduce our physical defense, and what I really like about this game, and this may be true in the other Dragon Quest games, is when you have a debuff, you can directly counteract that debuff with a buff of the same type. So minus physical defense, I can counter it with plus physical defense, and it will remove a stack of that debuff. Pretty cool. When the Slayer of the Sands is pepped, he can deal a lot of damage. As you just saw, he hit Azure for 53, which is almost one-shotting him. From here, he does a lot of damage, and the healing for trying to recover everyone can be pretty intense at this point, especially with only having one main character healing, which is Serena. But this fight doesn't really last too long, and the Slayer of the Sands does go down. Now, one thing I also don't really like is if someone is dead during combat when you defeat the enemy, they do not receive any of the experience. Yeah, I don't really like that. Not long afterwards is one of two Knights of Heliodor, and that is Jasper. As the main character levels up, I will start to gain more access to further healing spells, but right now we are just stuck with the bare basics of heal, which does heal for an okay amount at this point in the game, but it's really nothing special. As the main character levels up, he will start to gain more access to more advanced healing spells, which is going to be our main source of recovery if we are using this character. As we can't use the shops to buy better healing items, then magic is going to be the primary source. I felt pretty unlucky right here because Jasper completely dunks Veronica from 74 HP down to 0. And so that's going to be a little more than half of our damage gone because Serena's acting as our primary healer, Azure is the off healer and can only defend, and then Sylvando is our other damage dealer, which doesn't do a whole lot right now. A majority of Sylvando's damage comes from using his MP, and with him already getting pretty low on MP throughout the beginning of the fight, it wasn't looking good for the damage output, but we do try and get Serena to res Veronica quite a bit. Now, once again, the AI is doing the resing, and Azure is just kind of throwing out heals as he can. I do decide to increase everyone's agility, use a pep to try and further everyone's stats, but it's just not quite enough. Jasper's damage output is so high right now, and it gets even higher once he's pepped up, so needless to say, he hands us a game over. So I go back to grinding, only gaining one level on everyone, and we absolutely dumpster Jasper the second time around. It was almost no contest. It was such a massive difference on the damage output that I was dealing, as well as the amount of damage that I wasn't really taking. The AI just completely destroyed Jasper on the second fight, which was a little bit weird, but I'll take it. So we do beat him on the second time. Next up, after some story events, comes a series of what I would consider mini boss battles, because these are required, but they're not exactly random encounters or boss battles. But this takes place in Octagonia, where we enter into a tournament with our NPC friend Vince. Vince is pretty much going to be the MVP throughout all of these fights, as I'm just guarding for the most part, and try not to heal too much, because when I heal with Azure, that means I'm not defending, and when I'm not defending, I take a lot of damage. So a majority is going to be defending, while Vince is going to be the one to heal us and do all of the damage for us. We do end up wiping the first time on these two bros here, but the second time around was a lot easier. The next fight against Cinderella and Wambolina goes exactly like how our first round did. We do nothing but defend while Vince does absolutely everything for us. GG. I am such a leech in these arena battles, it's kind of funny. The next fight against Sylvando and Friend goes exactly the same way again. We defend and let Vince do everything to victory. The next fight against Rab and Jade is pretty RNG based. It took me 5 attempts to try and clear this fight. If they both target Azure, then it's pretty easy for Azure to go down even when he's defending. So as long as they target Vince, we're completely fine because he can't die. He acts like a guest party member and they are invincible. So with receiving the blessing from RNGesus, we do clear this fight after about 25 minutes worth of attempts. After the arena fight, Jade gets captured and taken to Aractagon, which is our next boss fight. This fight took me about 5 attempts, I think, maybe 6 to try and beat. His AoE damage output was really big. I believe we went into the fight at level 18, and after a couple of wipes, I decided that I needed to level up some more. This boss can be a pretty big jerk. He can reduce everyone's physical defense, which is pretty terrible because he hits really hard, and he can also cause confusion on multiple party members, as well as knock a party member or two down for 2 turns, which completely disables them from doing anything. And as you can imagine, with him being a spooter, he does happen to poison us as well. So Sylvando's regen magic does counteract it. However, that still takes up an entire turn when he can definitely be using that to do some damage output. So it is a little bit unfortunate when we get poisoned, but it shouldn't be anything that we aren't able to handle. Throughout the fight, I was pretty lucky that Azure and Serena both got pepped, and then I was able to use the Pep Power Care Prayer, which increases everyone's defense as well as magical healing ability. So Azure, Sylvando, and Serena are going to be able to heal for just a little bit more. And a main reason why I decided to use the Care Prayer was for the defense boost. The damage wasn't really an issue as long as everyone has MP, which they were not in any danger of running out towards the end of the fight. It was mostly just the healing that I was lacking in. And also from a gear perspective, I am trying to use the Forge as much as possible. Now, this is a little bit more difficult because at this stage in the game, I didn't really think about trying to farm the materials or going to certain zones and recollecting materials after I've already gathered them once. So our gear is really under par for this stage in the game. And after 8 minutes, the boss finally falls. This was definitely the biggest roadblock that I've had in the game so far. We return back to the arena to collect the grand prize, but Vince decides to put a show on us for us in a 1v1 battle. Now at this point, he's no longer taking his elixir that makes him superhuman, so this is going to be a forced battle, so we simply just continue to attack him until he falls while he continues to miss every single attack on us. So this is a forced win situation. Rab and Jade finally joined the party, and I was so excited. Jade is just like the coolest character. She can use fist weapons, she can use claw weapons, she can use a polearm, and if you guys know in my previous runs, fist weapons and polearms, I keep saying they're my most favorite types of weapons, and she can do it all. She is easily on par with Tifa for waifu material, probably one step above in my opinion. But enough glamorizing over pixels, and let's get back to the next boss fight, which is Dora. This was a really annoying fight. There's a lot of status ailments that she can inflict us with, such as Charm and Silence, and she casts them a lot. So I started off the fight with Azure, Jade, Veronica, and Serena, but over the course of the fight, I was noticing that because of the amount of CC that she was putting out on us, my heals were starting to lack, so I actually swapped Veronica out for Rab, so that way I have 3 potential healers and I'll be able to heal up any damage that she would be able to do. At least that was the theory. while Jade would just go to Pound Town with Show No Mercy tactic, and hopefully she would win us the fight. Every single turn for Azure when available when I wasn't charmed, I would be using it to try and heal the party, and Serena was also set to focus on healing, same with Rab. And so a lot of the time was just spent waiting for the party members to heal each other, because this was a very hard fight to try and heal through all of her damage. She hits really hard. And I'm also sure that's due to the fact that my equipment is severely lacking. I'm still trying to upgrade the equipment as I come by it, but I'm not going out of my way to try and reforge anything into better gear or go out of my way to try and farm materials for better gear. I'm just crafting with the mats that I have available. This fight took about 7.5 minutes, but we finally do down her, and I was a little bit worried because I don't remember the last time I saved before this. Now, I can continue through the autosave without losing any money or anything, but the autosave also doesn't keep into account all of the random battles that I fought to get to this point, so I'm really glad that I didn't get a game over. Fighting Jormund with solo Azure is a pretty easy fight. I'm pretty sure this is a forced victory, although I do think it's possible to get a game over on this fight. I didn't test that, but I do heal myself with mid heal anytime I reach about 40 to 50% HP, because when he becomes pepped up, of course, as with all other mobs, he does start to increase his damage quite a bit. So this fight is pretty easy and only lasts about 1.5 minutes. And this brings us to Crystalinda. This fight was pretty cool from a mechanic point of view, probably my most favorite fight in the entire game just because of all the different types of mechanics, although I am a little bit biased because ice is my most favorite fantasy element, so I guess that kind of helps my decision on this being my favorite. But she will occasionally cast Blizzard, which does increase the chance of melee attacks missing her. So because of this, I end up swapping Jade out for some more magic damage, like Sylvando, for example. I do start to replace Veronica later in the fight when the Blizzard is not active, and I replace her for Rab, so that way I can try and keep everyone healed a little bit more. She does tend to use an AoE attack quite a bit that damages everyone, and at this point, Serena nor Azure know multi-heal, and only Rab does. So he's going to be a pretty big staple mark for healing output for the party until Serena learns multi-heal. Crystalinda will also knock a party member down, which takes up 2 of their turns. So again, this is going to be pretty important from a healer perspective. If the healer gets knocked down, I have no problem bringing in Rab for multi-healing. Or if Rab was the main healer and he got knocked down, then I would bring in Serena. Either way, there's options to try and keep everyone's HP up. I felt like this fight wasn't really a DPS check, but more of a heal check, so once I started to figure that out, the fight went pretty smoothly, especially after I started swapping out the characters with the Blizzard being active. And it would have been kind of cool to see a little bit more storyline with Crystalinda, maybe as like another character that would join our party. It seemed like they put a lot of effort into this character. A couple more levels gained while proceeding on with the storyline, and up next is another rematch against Jasper, and this is a forced lose scenario. We just need to survive long enough for him to use an attack that drops everyone to 1 HP. And for storyline purposes, once that's done, the party is now scattered around the world, pretty much to where we first meet them. So we are now in charge of Sylvando, and we have to beat this group of thugs, which is pretty easy. We just continue to defend and heal ourselves with Sylvando, and our big brute Dave will do all of the damage for us. Is Jade's fight against Boudica, and this is a little tough. So throughout the fight, I spend a majority of the time defending, and when needed, I use the healing items that are on Jade. And I do actually die during this fight, but luckily for storyline purposes, I get resurrected. I definitely thought this was going to be a game over. And it still very well could be if I died a second time, I'm not really sure. But we defend our way to victory once more. Thank you, party members. The next scenario is with Rab, and this fight's a little bit weird. It is going to be against Grandmaster Pang. And she did game over us in round number 1, and I got the option to retry, which I thought was expected. So I did, and she game overed us again. However, I think it might have been part of the storyline that we were supposed to fail twice, or maybe we are supposed to beat her and we get like a different outcome or ending or something. I'm not entirely sure. But on the second attempt, I was very close to beating her, but she did kill us, but it still progressed with the storyline, so I'll take it, I guess. Fight once again includes a solo battle with Azure against the Headless Honcho and his friends, with Kendrick as a guest party member. Now again, guest party members can't die, so our only job here is to strictly defend and heal ourselves up if need be. Once the Headless Honcho is pepped, he can do quite a bit of damage if he only targets Azure, but with our HP pool being above 250, it's not too much of an issue right now tossing out a heal, while we don't really have the risk of dying if we're not defending. So, as always, we just defend, and Kendrick will eventually win this battle for us. With the next boss fight just right around the corner with Azure and Kendrick, this was a doozy of a boss fight. This took me, I think, 4 attempts to get through. The boss's damage output was very high. We do still have access to our heals, but we do have, more importantly, more heal, which is a pretty decent heal for this point in the game with our HP pool the way it is. So this is going to be key for us on this fight. Now, it does take a lot more MP than what the other heals do. This one takes 12 MP, so it's not like we can infinitely cast this throughout the fight, but we do a massive amount of defending. And with the AI, Kendrick tends to swap between the real one and the clone quite a bit, so the clone does stay up a lot longer than what it normally would. Hence why it took us about 4 attempts to get through this, because the damage output with the clone up was just extremely high, especially if they start to target only Azure. Notice I've been saying Kendrick, not Hendrick, so yellow. But this fight took us about 8 minutes. And after that last boss battle, Hendrick joins the party, we get Rab back, and now we have Sylvando as a guest. And don't mind the costumes, that is explained in the story. But this next fight is against Avarith, and it was a okay fight. It was more so annoying than anything because he keeps silencing the entire group. Rab's multi-heal comes extremely clutch on this fight, and with Sylvando being a guest, that also means that he doesn't have MP that he can run out of, at least as far as I know, as this was a 12.5-minute fight, and he just kept casting and casting and casting. So this was mostly just a battle of attrition. There was nothing particularly hard about this fight, other than the MP usage for Azure getting dangerously low towards the end of the fight with having to try and heal everyone. With Rab, he has a massive MP pool, so he can cast a lot of heals over a very prolonged fight, which was pretty awesome. And while keeping Hendrick on Show No Mercy, he was a pretty big portion of our damage, same with Sylvando. So again, just a long drawn out fight because he kept silencing us, but this fight wasn't particularly hard. Up next is the Restless Knight in the Dungeon of Helidor, and this fight also was more annoying than it was hard. He has a tendency to AoE sleep everyone with a pretty high success rate. And Hendrick can also do a massive amount of damage, but it takes a really big toll on his MP. So unless you can recover his MP, his damage output just isn't that sustainable when the AI is controlling him with Show No Mercy. He will also reduce everyone's physical defense, which makes it harder from a healing perspective, because Rab is the only one that can multi-heal at this point. Sylvando does get an AoE heal later in the game, but he doesn't have it quite yet. So it's just with Rab and Azure for healing duty, and Azure, of course, is only single target. We can now attack the Gloomnivore, who was controlling the Restless Knight, and pretty early in the fight, Azure and Sylvando do get pepped up, so we are able to increase everyone's physical attack by a significant amount, and this is really going to increase the damage output that Hendrick is able to do with his skills. This fight also isn't really anything special. Some characters do get slept throughout the fight, and with everyone getting a full heal at the start of this fight, that does mean that Hendrick now has full MP. So this fight is really just a matter of just not letting anyone die, and the AI can easily defeat this boss for you. And this boss goes down after about 3.5 minutes. The storyline takes us back to Octagonia to try and get Jade back in our party, and this is where we encounter our second wall-ish of the playthrough. So the fight against Jade herself isn't really that hard. My first couple attempts was more RNG based just because of the amount of damage that she can output, which also was a little bit weird because I never spec'd into spears or pole arms for her. Instead, I went into the fisticuffs and then into the claws. So the fact that she's doing all this damage with a spear was a little bit weird from, I guess, just my logical perspective. There wasn't anything too special about fighting Jade other than just the sheer amount of damage she dumps on the party, so just keep everyone healed and the AI will defeat her. Now, the hardest part of this fight is there is no remission or breather between Jade and the next fight, which is Booga. So whatever HP and MP your party is at when you defeat Jade is what you start off with when you fight Booga. And this was really difficult because Hendrik is a majority of our damage, and his damage is coming from using his skills. And just like with Jade, Booga also starts to CC train your entire group over and over and over. With charm and a knockdown effect, this fight was hard. Booga game overed us several times, and then when trying to get back to Booga, Jade ended up wiping us several times over again as well. So it took maybe about an hour or so worth of attempts to try and finally down him. But when we did, Sylvando had 0 MP pretty much from start to finish. It was a nightmare. I'm still not exactly sure how I ended up beating this fight with just AI party members, but I was able to use heal on Azure quite a bit, and Rab had a lot of MP going into this fight. So I definitely think Rab was the carry for this. And this is a fight that I do not want to repeat anytime soon. Booga will also drain everyone's MP away over time. So because of this, I ended up moving some MP restoring items from my item bag onto Azure, so that way I can start to recover people's MPs, particularly Hendrix, so that way he can continue to do the damage, as well as Rab if needed, so that way he can start healing a little bit more. And if I recall, this was really the first fight that I had to resort to using items to try and recover people's MP because the fight was just dragging out so long. But it also doesn't help that there was no recovery between Jade and this fight. And Booga goes down after 7 minutes. The first fight against Tatsunaga didn't go that well. This is by far the hardest hitting boss that I have encountered in the game so far. And it wasn't until I looked up a guide for this boss after I beat him that the guides recommend to wait to go to this area until I'm ready to proceed with essentially the final part of the storyline. One of the first things the boss does is crit Rab for 260, which is essentially one-shotting him. He only has 285 health, and he does a lot of AoE damage. When he crit Rab right there, I've already decided that I should probably relook at my gear before I proceed with the storyline, but I didn't quite learn my lesson right then. Healing wasn't really too big of an issue because Rab does have the multi-heal, but what is an issue is with Azure's res right now called Zing, it only has a probable chance to resurrect someone. It's not a guaranteed chance. But luckily for me, the first time Rab goes down, I am able to cast it and Rab does get back up. The damage output on the first phase right here, from my party perspective, is quite high, but he also doesn't really have that big of a health pool. This is kind of more of a DPS race, I think, rather than actual healing. But after 2 minutes, this boss does go down. When we proceed inside the mountain for a second time and get our second battle underway with Tatsunaga, he absolutely dumpsters us. He doesn't even consider recycling us. He just grabs us, opens up the dumpster lid, throws us in, and slams the door on our hands as we try and get back out. It was not a pretty sight. So with the last time we faced him, we were level 35 and we are now level 40, and I also went through every single person's gear and upgraded what I could with new forage recipes that I've been obtaining along the way. And it took me 5 attempts to try and down this guy. He still hit really hard. And at this point, I also was just like, hey, I don't have to keep Azure in the party. Let's replace him with Sylvando, because Sylvando can also AoE heal, and he can debuff the boss, and debuffs don't cause damage, so that's still within the rules. So why haven't I been using Sylvando this entire time? I have no idea. I don't have an answer for you. So for this fight, I had Jade and Hendrik on Show No Mercy, and then Sylvando and Rap on Follow Order, so that way I can continuously try and buff, debuff, and heal with not just one character, but 2 characters this time, and it was still a really big challenge. The boss does have a tendency to knock 1 or 2 of the party members down at any given point, so that reduces the amount of turns that we get by half. And if Rap gets knocked down, it is extremely bad because he is the main source of heals with the multi-heal. For party buffs, I try and keep agility and physical attack up on the party, as well as a physical defense if I can. But with the debuffs, I do try and keep Sap on the boss, which dramatically reduces his physical defense, and it is a very noticeable debuff. However, it also has a percentage to affect the boss, so it's not something that you want to keep spamming like 5 or 10 times over. If it keeps on failing, you probably want to use guaranteed buffs instead to help out the party damage. I did make the mistake of leveling up first and then adjusting everyone's gear, when I should have looked at the gear that I could make first and then level up from there. But it doesn't really make that much of a difference because I do have a very hard time at some later bosses in the playthrough. And this fight was about 8.5 minutes, and it was a really hard 8.5 minutes with how much preparation I had to do to beat this fight. The next boss is Alizarin, which was more so just like a really hard random encounter. This fight was just a complete pushover in every single way, shape, and form. So we're just going to show his death clip and move on. And now on to a real boss fight, Gildiga. Gildiga will occasionally summon 2 additional adds, which is not great for party-controlled AI, as they have a tendency to either focus the adds down, which is great, or more so not focus them down, which is really bad. The adds, if left up, do quite a bit of damage over time, and it's just not good for business. Gildiga will also occasionally turn 2 of the party members into gold, and the first time Gildiga uses this, Jade and Hendrik get hit, which also isn't great because now I have no damage output that's going to try and take care of the adds. But on the other hand, with them being in gold form, they don't take any damage. So the only thing that we have to make sure that we do is keep Sylvando and Rab healed up. I do spend more turns than I would have liked to try and apply debuffs onto Gildiga, such as Sap, which lowers their physical defense, making it so that way Jade and Hendrik do a lot more damage. So with Sylvando, he does have some party buffs, so I can increase everyone's turn speed, and I can also AoE heal everyone, which is absolutely fantastic. The first half, or 75% of the fight, wasn't really that bad. It's when Gildiga started getting down to about the last 25%, the damage output felt like it was ramping quite heavily. I almost game overed on this fight. He did turn Sylvando and Rab into gold, and then he completely walloped Jade and Hendrik, causing them to die, and I didn't quite have enough people alive to try and res them, so I was forced to use my sub-tier party members to try and finish out the boss, and with a literal last-ditched effort, I finally kill him. I was on the verge of game overing, and this was a 15-minute fight. With the next boss fight close by, Indignus also destroyed us really hard. We had to gain several level ups and redo everyone's gear again to try and gain more defense and more health and more attack power, because he just walloped us. The boss does have an ability to remove all beneficial status effects from the party, so it's important to not overbuff. So because of this, I try and mainly keep 2 buffs on me, and that is physical defense as well as agility. I do fail quite a bit trying to inflict sap and decelerate on the boss to reduce his physical defense and his agility, so that way I get more turns, he gets less. It did take effect a couple times, but not enough to really warrant continuously spamming it when I can get guaranteed bonuses for the same cost, which is the turn of the character. So at this point in the game, I now have the ability for Serena to where every time she casts something, she now has a slight chance to cast it again for free. So if I were to use a buff that affects the entire party, it has a chance to affect the entire party again. And so this was key for me being able to replace Rap for Serena. And I'm also not sure if it's intentional, but I still have the very starting wand for Serena. I never found better in the game. There may have been one from a shop or a side quest, but since we weren't doing the side quests and don't have access to shops, then I just simply don't know. I could have tried to reforge that weapon though, but I didn't know if it was really too valuable since it was her starting equipment. After several attempts, I barely managed to beat this guy. So I'm still pretty underleveled, I think. I've looked up several guides and video walkthroughs of people also doing this particular fight, and it shows them to be like level 57 and almost 60, and I'm just barely doing this at level 42 or 44, so I think I'm doing pretty good. Our final fight against Jasper, in my opinion, was a little bit weird and undertuned for some reason. So his damage output throughout the entire fight is very manageable from my perspective, and I'm only level 46 on my highest character, and it was just an overall easy fight. I was expecting this fight to be much more difficult, and he doesn't really inflict us with status ailments either. I do try and keep everyone's physical defense up as well as agility, and also try and spam sap and decelerate on the boss, which does take hold, and Hendrik goes to town on this boss. He has a lot of uptime to use his MP and damage the boss with his skills. It was pretty awesome. He is clearly the carry right now for this boss fight. From a healing standpoint, this was also pretty easy. I did get lucky on a couple casts of multi-heal with Serena, so she did get to cast it a second time, which didn't really affect the group. It maybe topped them off like another 50 or 60 HP, which was nothing game-breaking, but it was pretty cool to actually see those procs, especially on a multi-heal. Jasper will also occasionally summon an ad throughout the fight, and this ad can be 1 to 2 shotted with Hendrik's skills or Jade critting, so it's really not big of an issue. The ad's damage output as well is pretty manageable. It's nothing a multi-heal can't keep up with. There's really not a whole lot to say about this particular boss fight. It was pretty easy and undertuned in my opinion, and after 6 minutes he does go down. And up next is the final boss of the game. This is my equipment going into the fight, and as you can see, it's pretty lackluster across the board in my opinion. It's not that great. Additionally, I am only level 46 going into this last fight as well. The first of 2 phases for this boss is against the Lord of Shadows. This fight was extremely annoying because of the amount of physical damage that he can do, and he as well can remove all buffs from the party, so it's also important to not overbuff. He will occasionally summon an ad called Shadow of Shadows, which is a much weaker clone of himself, and it doesn't have that high of an HP pool, but it still does do quite a bit of damage. The AI for the most part is pretty good about targeting it down pretty quickly, which is always going to be a big bonus when your party members are controlled by AI. I do try and keep up agility as well as the physical defense of the party again, and the enemy also uses AoE fire attacks, and at this point I didn't know that I could use abilities on Serena that would have like the Hymn of Fire, which is a harpistry skill that you can learn. I didn't know that I could use those abilities. I thought I had to have a harp equipped for some reason. So yeah, it's a little weird that I'm only finding that out on the very last fight of the game, but it is what it is. And to top all that off, I didn't know about that until the second phase of this fight. The hardest part of the first and second phase was just the RNG that was needed for me to try and kill the boss with AI party members. For the first phase, it's the damage output that the Lord of Shadows does. He'll do an AoE attack that hits the entire party extremely hard, and then he gets a follow-up turn immediately and can one-shot pretty much anyone on the team. And most of the time he would either target Jade, which was really unfortunate because she's a heavy damage dealer, or he would target Serena, which means in order to res Serena, I have to swap out Sylvando for Azure or Rab, and as we all know, the healing for rezzing someone is not guaranteed. It's a % chance to res someone. Only Serena right now has the ability to res someone at 100% chance. So the first phase itself of this boss fight for me was an average of about 15.5 minutes per attempt. And there is no save spot in between his first form and the second form. So yeah, that's rough. And now on to phase 2. Immediately when entering this fight, I saw 2 targets and I immediately thought, oh god, this is going to end really badly. So I'm literally cutting out like 6.5 hours of attempts on this boss as well as the first phase, and I'm just going to go over the kill clip. So I learned pretty early on that if the AI targets the right one, which is More Dragon, and he dies, the tail, which is on the left, will end up resurrecting the More Dragon on the right. And when that happened, I was just like, oh my god. So my very first attempt on this dude, I thought I was actually going to one-shot him, but as soon as he casted res, I knew that it was immediately a game over because I didn't have any more MP on Rab or Serena. I blew through everything. And because the AI is targeting the one on the right first, all that damage is just being wasted if they don't target the one on the left. So there's a couple different phases to this fight. The first phase, the tail will be targetable only. And so all of that damage output on the tail is permanent, which is great. And then the next phase is More Dragon is targetable while the tail is in the background, so you can only target More Dragon, which again is okay. However, the phase after that, both of them become targetable, and the AI does not switch from More Dragon over to the tail. They continue to damage More Dragon, which isn't good because again, the tail's just gonna res him. And this was the issue with the AI party members, and this was really the downfall of this entire fight. Hence why there was about 7 hours worth of attempts on this fight, and you better believe I was nerd raging really hard. I came pretty close a couple times to where I would defeat the dragon on the right, and then that would of course force the AI to target the one on the left, and then the tail would resurrect More Dragon, and then the AI would continue attacking the tail, which was great, and then I got the tail down, and then More Dragon would end up wiping out the party because I didn't have any more MP for the rest of the group. So there was a lot of attempts trying to just get the RNG in my favor. I don't know how to manipulate RNG. I don't even know if that's a thing for this fight, but really the determining factor of I think why I was able to beat this fight is because of the crits that Jade was doing with her auto attacks. It really saved my bacon. With all of the crits coming out from Hendrik and Jade, that indirectly helps the party from an MP usage standpoint because I'm not having to try and survive the onslaught of attacks and heal everyone up. So on the kill attempt, I was able to get the right dragon down pretty quickly with everyone at about 60% MP, which was great. And then that forced everyone to target the tail died, and then we went back onto More Dragon. Once the tail's dead, then there is no resurrecting him at all. All damage is permanent from then on. It's really important to keep Hymn of Fire up, and this was also the fight that I learned that I didn't need to have a harp equip in order to use it, so that definitely would have helped out on previous fights. And then I also was using the AoE magic defense buff to help wipe away the debuff that the boss was giving us, because a lot of their attacks are magic, and More Dragon, the one on the right, tends to use physical attacks. I probably could have made this fight a lot easier if I continued to level up some more. However, that still wouldn't have changed the fact that the fight would have been RNG based on how much damage I can deal More Dragon, and that would leave me with a whole lot of MP to deal with the tail and then back to More Dragon. So I felt like I had it at this point and I didn't need to level up anymore since it was still going to be RNG based. The tail will occasionally eat someone, which I'm perfectly okay with and usually prefer that because that means that he's not doing party-wide damage. Instead, he'll just eat someone, lock them up for a couple turns, and when he spits them out, that character will get a dot, and it will also knock them inactive, I believe, for 2 turns, which I'm still okay with because that's not damage that he's doing to the party in the meantime. It actually gives me the opportunity to heal up a little bit. And because for the most part I have 2 DPS and 2 healers, it doesn't really matter who he targets. And with RNG finally on my side after 7 hours, I'm sure my fiance was getting tired of me yelling, I finally beat this thing. And so, can you beat Dragon Quest XI using only party members' damage? Yes, you can, with patience. And we also did it without shopping at all. If you don't have patience, you're not going to be able to do it. Or you can just over level like crazy. I still think I was pretty under leveled throughout this entire playthrough, and that was also the goal. I know that there was a draconian quest, but I also didn't want to really lock myself into something that I wouldn't be able to complete, because this also was my very first time playing this game. So it was just kind of more of a precaution on my end, but according to everything that I've looked up, I was still pretty underleveled for this fight. Additionally, I think my gear was pretty terrible as well. I'd really like to know what you guys thought of this playthrough in the comments. I really did try to make this short by only showing the boss fights, and we're still here after 45 minutes or so still talking about the game. This was really long. Please feel free to subscribe, like, leave a comment, share, and if you want to see more of these videos, the way that you help me do this is with the comments and the amount of views on the video. It really helps me determine where your guys' interests are and what you like to see. And remember, I do these challenge runs so you don't have to. I strive to do challenge runs that no one else has done for a game. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Additionally, if you want to go above and beyond that, consider joining my Patreon or YouTube community via the join button next to my name below the video. Until then, I will catch you in the next challenge run. Bye bye.